Are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's do it.
I feel like this is a good segue to where we're going, because ESPN has wide receiver as Notre Dame's biggest question mark heading into this season. So my question is, what do you have as Notre Dame's biggest question mark?
Wide receiver. I think the offensive line, while it's young and inexperienced, will find its way. I think they have a quarterback that, as long as he stays healthy, is going to produce. I feel more confident about Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price than I do, than this wide receiver room as a whole. And listen, it shouldn't be a coincidence that, the recent wide receiver struggles in terms of recruiting parallels, what ESPN also thinks is Notre Dame's kind of biggest question mark going into the season, right? And that's the fun part about this, is because if the offense handles its business, all of these questions and all of these problems become solved. It just takes this offense producing and showing everyone that, it's a new offense. And that's essentially what it is Marcus Freeman really hasn't had an identity on the offensive side since being the head coach at Notre Dame. I think he's found some consistency in Denbrock, and he's going to provide consistency at quarterback, offensive scheme, wide receiver room. All of these things are naturally going to work out over the next couple of years, but it always takes that first class to kind of sway things, to show people, hey, this is what this offense is capable of accomplishing. So, and again, to me, it's offensively, the wide receiver position is what's going to take them over the top. If they produce and have a lot of success at wide receiver, combined with, how good we know they're going to be on defense, then really what's stopping this team?
It's a fair take. And obviously, especially when you look at last year, there's every reason to say wide receiver should be the number one question, because especially if you're looking outside in, it's like, well, you got no production from the wide receivers last year. The offense traditionally doesn't get much production from the wide receivers. Can they actually get production from the wide receivers? But to me, the fact that they brought in these three experienced guys, including Jaden Harrison, but the two primaries being Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins, and I think the continued evolution of these young guys like Greathouse and Faison, whom we've talked about, it should be okay. But then again, we thought it was going to be okay last year, and it just turned into a total mess. But the two reasons it turned into a total mess to me, one was the whole Tobias Merriweather thing. We just put way too much expectation on Tobias Merriweather because of recruiting rankings and what we thought he was going to be, and yada, yada, yada. And then we had no idea what a mess everything was internally with the position coach and everything else. And then you throw the injuries, the hamstring injuries specifically, on top of all that, and that led to some of that. So there's every reason to say that it is, but to me, foundationally, it is much more the offensive line that is the biggest question. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that it is going to be a bad offensive line, but specifically, the right tackle has to get solved. There are three candidates who we've mentioned: Tosh Baker and Emil Wagner, the two veterans, and then the incoming freshman, Gerby Lambert. And, maybe the presence of a young, talented guy like Lambert, even if he doesn't win the job, pushes those other two guys to get better. And one of them, doesn't just sort of win the job by default, but actually takes it over. And even Jagasaw at the other side is going to be a question, because, again, he's stepping in for a guy who was a top 6 pick in the NFL draft. Both of these guys, a first-round pick and a second-round pick. So to me, the fall off in the actual production that they have, there is true fall off there. Whereas, like, what Notre Dame lost from the receiver core last year, there's really the only place to go is up from last year. So that's why the offensive line, and and that's not even to mention the fact that the flux you've got, you're replacing a guy who was a pretty good center, not a great center, but you got him to transfer out to NC State because you got a guy like Craig coming in. And then what's going to happen? We don't know officially. We think Schrouth is going to be the right guard. And then is it going to be Coogan or Spindler at the left guard? So there's still some questions to go in there at a very important, especially when you've got a quarterback who did have the kind of injury that he had last year. You got to protect him. You got to, like everything that comes down to the offensive line between protection, running the ball, all that. So that's why I put offensive line at the top of the list as opposed to the receivers. But again, there's a case for wide receiver. But like when we did the position group rankings last week, Vince and I, we both had receiver above the tight ends and above the offensive line. And Notre Dame, what's Notre Dame predominantly been known for the past 10, 15 years? Tight ends and offensive line. You can go back like 20 years with tight ends and offensive line. And we put our confidence more so in the wide receiver group than we put in the tight end and the line coming into this year. All right. So we're moving on. Next question comes from Andre Tonsel, regular, of course, of the show. Listener, subscriber, everything else. He put this up on the boards today, and he tweeted this at me, asked me if I would use this in rapid fire as well. So here it is. What if Notre Dame is ranked as the number 4 team in the country with a record of 11-1, and the College Football Playoff Committee seeds them number 7 or 8 because the teams that lost the Power 4 Conference Championship games lost in close games? So what do you think of this as a possibility?
What I think is if any team goes into a playoff matchup ranked below Notre Dame and they beat a team better than themselves and Notre Dame, they'll leapfrog Notre Dame. If they lose, no matter how close it is, I still think that they stay below Notre Dame.
Don't forget, if you win the conference championship game, you are automatically, well, I won't say automatically, the top 4 conference the 4 highest rated conference champions get those, 1 through 4 seats. So that could be potentially a group of 5, like if the group of 5 team is considered to be ranked higher than a Power 4, for example. But if you win your conference, the teams that win their conference championship games, those are the teams that get seeded 1 through 4.
Yeah, so basically what it would come down to is, would a team lower than Notre Dame beat a team higher than Notre Dame, get a conference championship, automatically lock up one of those 1 through 4 spots, and the team that was previously ahead of Notre Dame, will they stay ahead of Notre Dame even though they lost? So I think that this question has a lot of layers to it, and it's hard when you play a lot of the hypotheticals because I feel like there's so many counter arguments.
And that's kind of the problem, and like there's always going to be an argument against everything. And I guess I would say, first of all, like when I look at this as a scenario, I think the odds against this specific scenario are probably around 500-1, like that this could happen because, again, like when you look at the layers, the closest Notre Dame has been to this specific scenario would be 2021. They were the number 5 ranked team before the playoffs. They were 11-1. Their only loss was to Cincinnati, which was 13-0 and ranked number 4. So that's like the closest Notre Dame has been. But, like in that specific year, you also had Georgia and Alabama in the top 3 was, again, Cincinnati at number 4. And then you had Michigan at number 2. But for Notre Dame to be 11-1, but still be ranked number 4 would most likely mean that their loss is to one of the top 3 teams in the country. And that team in all likelihood would be undefeated going into championship weekend, conference championship weekend. So if Notre Dame is number 4 going into conference championship weekend, that would mean they were already ranked ahead of one of the Power 4 conference teams going into that weekend, which means that team also would have at least one loss. So either way, the best seed that Notre Dame can get, obviously, is a number 5. So they basically start with that seed. So I kind of played this out a little bit. Let's say 12-1 Michigan loses to 10-2 Ohio State in the Big Ten. 12-1 Alabama loses to 12-1 Georgia in the SEC. 11-1 Baylor loses to 11-2 Oklahoma State in the Big 12. And then in the ACC, in this example, I'm saying Florida State is 12-0, and that's the team that Notre Dame lost to. They lose to a 10-2 Clemson team. So you've got multiple lost teams winning those conference championship games. So that means Alabama, Baylor, Michigan all had one loss going into their championship games. Florida State was undefeated. Notre Dame had one loss, close loss to Florida State. Again, that's probably the only way they're going to be there. So, there's also an outside chance that a group of 5 champ jumps into the top 4 since you've got so many 2-loss conference champions, because again, it's the height. You've still got to attain the highest rank. It's not necessarily you're one of the 4 highest ranked teams, but you're the highest ranked conference championship. So they could conceivably drop to 7 or 8. I think 7, as a low if they were 4 before that, but I still, they don't have the extra game. Either way, they still get a first round playoff game that they're going to get to host because 5, 6, 7, and 8 are going to get to host. I just still think it's very unlikely because, again, you've got them with 1 loss and ranked as the number 4 team. So I think it's a very unlikely scenario, but again, there's so many layers to it. There's just so many factors for something like that to make it actually happen.
Yeah, and I think long story short, what's going to have to happen is an underdog and a conference champion is going to have to beat an undefeated or 1-loss team ahead of Notre Dame. And now both of those teams would be ahead of Notre Dame by default, essentially. That's
right.
No matter what the conference is. And so how many times that happens, whether that's, maybe the Big Ten, the SEC, and the ACC, or maybe it's just one conference, I do believe if a team is to upset a higher ranked team and win the conference, then both of those teams in the conference championship are likely to be ahead of Notre Dame. And that's regardless of conference. I think that's across the table.
And I mean, this is the bottom line here, what Josh is saying. Notre Dame goes undefeated, gets the 5 seed. I mean, that's it. That's really the only way they're going to control their own destiny. I don't think, barring, like 6 teams being undefeated potentially, I don't see them being any lower than the 5 if they're undefeated, And again, like part of this scenario that Andre had was that they already had 1 loss. So if you already have 1 loss, there's just, some of that is going to be out of your own hands to a good extent, I think is what it comes down to.
Sorry, my dogs aren't smart enough to know that their own owner has come home.
Hey, it happens. One of those happens all the time. So these are the college football programs that have the most all-time wins without ever winning a national championship. Wisconsin, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, Utah, North Carolina, Missouri, Purdue, Oregon, Baylor, and NC State. Which, Jesse, do you think is the most surprising?
To me, the most surprising comes down to Wisconsin and Oregon. And at the end of the day, I'm going to have to say, because it's like Wisconsin is more of like your true kind of more feels like blue blood type, been around a while. How have they not won it type situation? But Oregon is like they've come on strong recently and they've got the resources. They've got recruits. They've got now NIL money. They've got the whole Nike situation. They played in the Pac-12, which was, not one of the more stronger conferences by tradition, I think you would say. So for me, I'm just going to go with Oregon just because of their relevance as of recently. You know what I mean? I can't really speak of Wisconsin before I was born, but it feels like Oregon, ever since I was in at least middle school, came out on the scene strong. And I thought for sure that they'd get one, right? Like, because they'd been at least they lost the one to Ohio State, I want to say. And it just like they had the quarterbacks to do it. They had Mariota, they had Justin Herbert, they've got it all there. It's just they haven't done it. So
just think if Chip Kelly had stayed at Oregon instead of going to the NFL. Like, do you think we're talking about Oregon with at least 1 national championship by now if he stays around the way he had that thing going?
I think so.
I do too.
I think so. And so, like, again, I think Wisconsin is probably more of the traditional answer. But for me, because of, more relevance and kind of my time as a college football fan, I'm going to have to go with Oregon just because, again, like they have the resources to be really good and they've shown the flashes of being really good. They just haven't gone over the top.
I mean, it's Oregon more for the recency because of all the things that you talked about, especially probably the last 15-ish years, however long that's been, again, since Chip Kelly, really got it rolling. But then when you go back, like they've both been around since the late 1800s, but Wisconsin football has been a program for 135 years. They have 742 all-time wins. Notre Dame has only been around 2 years longer than Wisconsin, but they have more than 200 more wins than the Badgers all time. You would have thought that at some point in Wisconsin's, especially their early history, they would have kind of snuck out one of those national championships when you obviously didn't have playoffs and it was just polls and stuff like that. They probably got hurt by the fact, to some extent that, Notre Dame was out there kind of gobbling up votes across the Midwest, even though it was I think early 1900s, before they got good again later. But they feel like a program that could have somewhat mirrored the success that Nebraska was having in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, basically, because, it's you get the homegrown, give it all that cheese-fed, corn-fed, offensive linemen and all that different kind of stuff. It feels like Wisconsin should have been that to some extent and just never were quite there. So for the, again, for the shorter term, more recency, I would definitely say Oregon, but the competition has also been tougher for Oregon. They went long periods without ever really being a high quality college football program, where it feels like Wisconsin should have been better, like 50s, 60s, 70s, that era, but they never were.
Yeah. So we agree that it came down to those two, though, right?
Yeah, for sure. Because the others, when you look at them, like Virginia Tech, West Virginia, Utah, Carolina, Missouri, Purdue, Baylor, NC State, none of them have ever been traditional, college football, just consistently really good teams, let alone national championship caliber. Obviously like Carolina and Missouri are basketball schools. NC State is a basketball school more so. So I don't think that's overly surprising. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Minnesota Vikings rookie quarterback JJ McCarthy only threw 34 passes in the fourth quarter for Michigan last season.
It's concerning. And the reason why it's concerning is in the NFL, it's just no lead is safe. And really, every game in the NFL is as probably a touchdown or 2 touchdown score come the fourth quarter, right? And so I just think that it's a system or process that's not ultimately going to work in the NFL. And it's concerning because how do you know how JJ McCarthy is going to perform in those high tense, high leverage, high stress situations, and it's
never been in them.
He's never been in them. And I understand that they had a great offensive line and a great running game, but it still shows to me an overall lack of confidence because his only job was to not turn the ball over, right? And so that's what Michigan was content with is, okay, well, come fourth quarter, we're just going to hand the ball off. And as long as you don't turn the ball over, we're going to rely on our really good offensive line and our really good defense. And we don't even care if it's a close game, some of those games, I think Penn State, it wasn't a blowout in the second half, but they refused to pass the ball. They just wanted to continuously hand off the ball. And I guarantee in the NFL, there's going to be high leverage, you just can't hand the ball off to your running back anymore. You have to be able to pick up first downs. You have to be able to, extend the clock, keep drives going. And then there's going to be times too where you're going to have to lead a fourth quarter comeback purely on your arm. And so the fact that he has no tape of any performance, hardly any performance in the fourth quarter, that's really concerning to me, especially a guy that you are willing to invest your franchise in.
Like Sloppy Joe was saying, in the NFL, most games are won and lost in the fourth quarter.
Exactly.
The games are
and that's kind of what I was getting at with my opening statement.
Right. The games are going to be much more competitive in the fourth quarter in the NFL, where there are fewer teams and the talent level is closer together than in college, where a team like Michigan can just be, physical and maul everybody up at the line of scrimmage and, in a fairly average Big Ten from top to bottom. Like we've talked about before, the Big Ten is top heavy and just, all the things that you talked about. And then in Hard Knocks, the Giants Hard Knocks that they're doing right now, they had McCarthy in, and when they had him in for his interview at the Combine and they were having him drop the play on the board, they were asking him some questions, and it's essentially, like Jim Harbaugh was pulling the strings. The guy didn't really even have to think that much, let alone make high leverage type throws in the fourth quarter. Like Harbaugh was pulling the strings from the line of scrimmage. The offensive line was doing most of the thinking for him in terms of coverages and stuff like that. So there was very little that JJ McCarthy had to do. And then on top of it, he has something like 1,000 fewer overall pass attempts in his career than most of the other quarterbacks who were selected in this year's draft. So like he's the product, like he's a product of just a very good system and a very good head coach who is making a high majority of the decisions for him. So I'm going to be really curious to see what exactly, especially his early career, looks like. Like if he was with Sean McVay, it might be one thing, because McVay is obviously, like he's known for pulling the strings and all that kind of stuff, especially when he had Jared Goff out there. But I don't know. I'm going to be really curious to see what he looks like. Okay, so with NFL training camps underway, Jess, we're going to start doing this question for each of the divisions. How many teams from the AFC North can win the Super Bowl this season? How many you got?
AFC North. So that gives me the Bills.
No, that's the.
Oh, no. That's the Bengals, the Steelers, the Ravens.
Right.
And the Browns. I give that, of the teams in that division, I'm going to say 2. And I think it's the Bengals and I think it's the Ravens ultimately. I think the Bengals have enough offensively. It's just a matter of Joe Burrow, right? And can they be enough on defense? And then for me, it's the Ravens. It's like, can they get over the hump? Like they've been there. They have a really good defense. They have an MVP level quarterback. Like what is missing for them? A top tier wide receiver, a game-changing running back. That's got to be on the top of the list for me. In terms of the Steelers, they don't have any. They're just not offensively impressive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like end of career Russell Wilson or maybe a resurgence of Justin Fields isn't enough to excite me offensively. They'll be good enough.
I don't think it excites most people. Yeah.
They'll be good enough defensively to be a 500 or wild card team. The thing about the Browns is like what shows you that they're going to put back-to-back good seasons up, right? Deshaun Watson, still a huge question mark. Is he actually there to play or is he there to collect the guaranteed money? They'll have a really good defense again. They have the defensive player of the year of Myles Garrett. So it's like, I don't know. I just don't see enough out of the Browns and the Steelers. So it's got to be Bengals or Ravens. And I'm leaning more so towards the Ravens because I think they have more of the pieces like defensively.
I don't know if like DK has been sipping too many cocktails this afternoon or what. He's saying all 4 is the correct answer. There's no way the Steelers have a chance to win a Super Bowl. If I'm, like you said, they've got a chance to sneak into the playoffs like last year, like be right on that playoff bubble. They're not winning a Super Bowl though with what they've got. The Browns have the best defense in the division, but how much better can Deshaun Watson make him, assuming he stays healthy all year this year? Again, like I said, I can see the Browns making the playoffs.
Yeah, but what's difference between their outcome last season? There's nothing to show me that they're not a first round exit out
That's
of the
what
playoffs.
I was getting ready to say. I can see them making the playoffs, maybe winning a playoff game, but that's it. That's their cap. I think that's as far as they go this year. I think the Bengals definitely have the best, overall offense in the division with Joe Burrow back, assuming he's healthy and there's every reason to believe that he is. Yeah, between Chase and Higgins and everything that they've got there, probably the most balanced overall team in the division because the Ravens have the most talented quarterback. I think they've got the best total offense, power offense with Derrick Henry. But, like, look at what they did. They completely, like, coached themselves and play called themselves out of the game against the Chiefs in the playoffs last year. But Ravens and Bengals, to me, the answer is 2. Ravens, Bengals are the only 2 teams that have a chance. Either one of them you could see getting hot and making a run in the playoffs. So that's my answer, is 2.
Anthony did not like your comment there. I'm pretty sure he's a big Steelers fan, so that would explain it. But I think the Steelers and Browns are pretty similar on offense.
They won a lot of games with Joe Flacco last year, right?
Right.
It wasn't because of the arm talent of Joe Flacco. It was because of the defense that they had. So, is there a case for Pittsburgh? Okay, there's probably a case.
Who do you like better out of Bengals and Ravens?
As a team, you mean?
Yeah.
Honestly, I would pick the Bengals, because if both quarterbacks are at full health, which team has gone farther in the playoffs before? The Bengals. They've gone to the Super Bowl just a couple of years ago. They beat the Chiefs to get there. So I've got to go with the Bengals.
They show, even though that they probably don't have as good of a defense, sadly, even though Burrow's never won MVP, he's shown that he can play at the highest level and propel them all the way to a Super Bowl.
As we've all seen, there's a big difference between winning regular season games and winning in the playoffs, especially when you're going head-to-head in matchups against other elite quarterbacks. And, that's why quarterbacks are judged the way they are on championships.
I mean, it's the most important position.
Yep. So I would, of the 2, I would put the Bengals ahead, because Ravens have had some really good regular season teams, but they've bounced their way out of the playoffs pretty early, just like last year. So Jim Leyland was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame this weekend. Who is the next manager who should get the call to the Hall?
So I was reading some interesting arguments about this. I believe there's 271 players in the Hall, soon to be 280. And there's a lack thereof of managers. And I'm not saying that there needs to be equal amounts, but I think like a fair number is like 10% of the Hall should be comprised of managers at the end of the day. I think that there should be a few more managers than what there is, essentially. Sure. So my list came down to 4 guys. I'd be curious to see if those 4 are also on your list. I had Cito Gaston.
I didn't think about Cito. That's a good one. That's been a while.
Davey Johnson, Lou Piniella, and then I have a current guy, Bruce Bochy, but I mean, I think he's fair to consider. So kind of some brief resumes because I know there's not a lot of, ton of maybe baseball nerds like there are out there, like we are, but Cito Gaston won 5 division titles in 12 years, 2-time World Series champ as a manager.
With Toronto, and what have they ever been since then?
Yep. With Toronto. And he was the first African-American manager to win the World Series as well. I think that has significance when you're talking about, the Hall of Fame.
Right.
Next up, Davey Johnson, 6 division titles with 4 different teams, 1986 World Series. And I think most impressive about him as a manager, he averaged a 91-71 record as regular season record as a manager. 20 games above 500 was his average record as an MLB manager. So I thought that was
Davey Johnson.
I thought that was pretty impressive. Next up was Lou Piniella, 17th all-time in wins, 6 division titles with 3 teams. Mariners have 3 division titles all-time. All 3 of those came from Lou Piniella. So I thought that was an interesting one about Lou. Bruce Bochy, 500 regular season manager, pretty even keel as regular season. But what sets him apart is he's 36-17 in the postseason, 5 World Series appearances with 3 different teams, and 4 World Series titles with 2 different teams. Obviously, last year,
Bochy's got to be a lock.
That's what I mean. That's why it's almost like when you go through his resume, it's not even fair to consider him.
Right.
So I'm going to go Cito Gaston and Bruce Bochy at the end of the day. Those are my 2.
I totally forgot about Cito Gaston. I think that is a great call, especially for someone your age. And even Davey Johnson is a good call for someone. I mean, because the Mets, there are a lot of people who think that they underachieved in that window because they were so great in 86, but they were never able to come anywhere close to doing that again, even though they got to the playoffs, but they got a little bit worse every year. But if you look at the futility of the Mets for several years before Davey Johnson took over, and then the fact that they did have that great 86 season, and then he was still pretty good manager when he was with Baltimore after that. So I think there's a case for him, but not nearly as like Bochy. He's number 9 all time in wins, 3 World Series titles with the Giants, and then just won one with the Rangers, and then he took the Padres to the World Series as well. There's no way he's not getting it. There's just no way. To me, I'm surprised you didn't say Terry Francona, like 13th on the all-time wins list, and won, of course, 2 World Series with the Red Sox, ending the 86-year drought in 2004, led the Red Sox to the only team ever to come back from a 3-0 deficit in professional sports to beat the Yankees in the ALCS. And then, of course, he got the Indians to the World Series, 1 win away, needed just one more win to win the World Series with the Indians. But so I think Francona's got a very strong case. And I think Dusty Baker's got a pretty strong case as well, because he's only got the 1 World Series win, but he also got the Giants to the World Series and also had some pretty good success with the Cubs before blowing that NLCS lead in 2003. But he's number 7 on the wins list all time.
See, but to me, it's like, who you taking, Dusty or Lou? I think it's like one or the other if you're going to, because they're kind of same era.
And I think Piniella is probably more widely considered the better manager, even though
he just didn't get the World Series. And so like that's Dusty's trump card. But those two are so similar to me. I think you're either one side or the other, essentially. Because I consider Dusty Baker, but even though he has the World Series, I thought that Piniella had a more consistent kind of track record. Yeah. And I like the fact that he won those division titles with the Mariners and no one else has with the Mariners.
It's a good comparison, Sloppy Joe. Cito Gaston, Major League Baseball's version of Tom Flores. And Flores, of course, the Raiders coach. He's the guy who came after John Madden and won a couple of Super Bowls. But I think that, for a long time, he was kind of largely overlooked. But again, like when you look at a guy with, Latin heritage who led the Raiders to a couple of Super Bowls, Cito, as you said, the first African-American manager. Tommy's saying, who's Tom Flores? Again, the former Raiders.
I think the only thing that hurts Cito and is like, I know it's like, that's just typical kind of baseball mind. I just don't think he managed long enough.
Right.
What I mean? He was just, they want you to be in it for like 20 to 30 years, right? You can't just have like a 10 to 12. That's the whole point of the Baseball Hall of Fame, is like consistent longevity success, either as a player or a coach. And so even though, Cito and Bochy were my 2 kind of guys, Cito would be really hard because, again, I just don't think he coached long enough. That would be my argument.
So Bochy is number 1 of all the names that we've mentioned. Who would be your number 2?
I'm still going to go Cito, even though I still think he's deserving. I just don't think the MLB would ultimately put him in.
I think it's a good choice. Maybe he gets in at some point, but I still think Francona would be my number 2 because of the Red Sox drought and the fact that he got not just 1, but 2.
And he took a completely different organization to a World Series as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And they kind of, not to say they collapsed, but they kind of did.
But like small market, they were always competitive the entire time he was there in Cleveland. So
John's got my back here.
Back-to-back champs should make up for the length.
Especially in Toronto. Like, Toronto has not done anything.
Yeah, and I mean, let's not forget, like, the Braves were America's team in that span, but it was, I guess they beat the Phillies in one of them, but it was I guess they beat the Phillies and it was the Twins that beat the Braves. So I don't even know what I'm talking about, but the Blue Jays came in. Yeah, but yeah. So my point was going to be, like, of that era, one of the best teams, one of the greatest teams of that era.
For fun, who would be your number 3?
I like the case that you made for Piniella, But again, I think what works against him is just the lack of the championships.
So maybe Davey
that he had.
Davey Johnson.
Davey Johnson. I like that. Where is he on the wins list? Do you know? Like, did he manage long enough?
Let's see. Davey Johnson all-time wins list. Why isn't it just like up there? MLB managers all-time wins. There. That's probably what I should have looked up.
Dusty Baker is 7. Bochy is 9. Francona is 13. Gene Mock is 15. Lou Piniella is 17.
Jim Leyland, who just got in, was 18.
Yeah.
Man, he's not even in.
Davey Johnson is all the way down
33.
At 33. And I don't think there's a strong case for Piniella as maybe I thought. I'm going to go Dusty. I'm going to bump Dusty up there. Yep.
I think my 3 would be Bochy, Cito, and then Tito.
Okay.
Cito, then Tito.
All right. I like it. Notre Dame alum Arike Agumbawale earned MVP honors with 34 points to lead the WNBA All-Stars to a win over the U.S. Olympic team in the All-Star game over the weekend. Scale of 1 to 10. How worried should the U.S. team be heading into the Paris Olympics?
I think a fun question is which U.S. team should be concerned more, the women's or the men's. But
I thought about that, but I figured that there was
we
also
can talk
a rabbit
about both.
hole. I mean, the last I saw, the men were struggling against Germany today as well. Did they end up winning that game? Do you know?
I'm not sure, but I mean, it took a literal last-second bucket to beat South Sudan the other day, and it's like then you flip on, you see the women's Olympic team is losing to the WNBA All-Star team. Scale of 1 out of 10. I think this has to be an 8 out of 10 to me because of, this is basketball and this is the United States. This is the sport that on, both men's and women's that is always dominated. And so it's not a good look, especially a nationally televised event where you're putting your supposed, best team in the entire country up against the All-Stars, and they can't even beat the All-Stars, right? And so maybe it's a lack of, who was taking it more seriously type situation, right? Did the All-Stars have more something to prove because they weren't on the Olympic roster? Was it more of like the Olympic roster kind of, feeling each other out, getting their legs underneath them as a starting rotation? I don't know, but it's like, again, when I think of U.S. basketball and the Olympics, I just think of like the dream team, and not even the dream team, but just dominating, right? And so when I see, the United States is struggling against its own All-Stars, when I see they're struggling against South Sudan, Germany, I put both teams at an 8 out of 10 on my level of concern.
Yeah, see, I don't think it's really a concern for the women's team because I think what it does is just show the depth that, like the women's game has. I think that you could probably, just send the WNBA All-Star team that won this game, and they could probably win the gold medal with that team as well. I still think that the Olympic team is going to win the gold medal. Like when you look at the play of Arike and Caitlin Clark, I think it verifies the fact that Diana Taurasi got a complete sympathy vote by even being on this team. She has no business being on
why
this
were
team.
they double teaming Clark the entire width of the court?
Right.
Length of the court, sorry.
Right. And she didn't score a lot, but she still had 10 assists. And Agumbawale just goes off in the second half after having nothing in the first half and ends up scoring the most points in an All-Star game ever. And those are the two who, were the most notable snubs on this whole thing. So, yeah, like people talk about Clark being a marketing, it would have just been a marketing ploy if you had her on the team and all this stuff. It's just a sympathy vote by trying to get Diana Taurasi another gold medal. That's the only reason she's on the team, trying to set a record with her, rather than actually having some youth and excitement on the team in either one of these two. And I think that they both showed that they absolutely belonged on this team. I mean, like Clark made Kelsey Plum look foolish out there a couple of different times. Sloppy Joe says she dropped out. It's one of those, she dropped out because she knew she wasn't going to be on the team kind of things. That's essentially what
It's
it
like
was.
when the head coach gets fired but resigns.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But in any case, good for them. Again, I'm not worried about the women's team. I think the men's team should absolutely be worried because they've already got a track record of completely underperforming at the Olympics. And
I think they have a lot of pressure.
Yeah. To only beat Sudan by 1 point. Ooh, man. All right, well, that's going to do it for today. We do appreciate you being here. As always, hit that like button before you leave. Notre Dame football training camp, 9 days away. It starts a week from Wednesday. And, of course, we will be with you here all the way through Notre Dame football training camp and through the season as well. Forget that 40 days or whatever it is to the start of the season. 9 days is when the season starts, when training camp rolls out. And we've got you. All right. Again, hit the like button. Appreciate it. We will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.
Peace.